Welcome, everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm Dee Herman. I'm on the steering committee of the Jewish Earth Alliance. And our dear Mirala Goldsmith is away in Europe right now on a well-deserved trip. And Rabbi Deborah Lynn is taking a little break. She's just been out there with her daughter who just birthed twins. Yippee. We're blessing you with the wonders of additional grandparenthood and healthy babies and healthy mama. So I want to start with a little Devar, since I mentioned that this is a week about Jacob. The Parsha this week is Vayechi, and he lived, which is actually interesting because, yes, he did live, and now he's at the end of his life. And in the text, it says, he was gathered into his people. So if you look at it, you could think, as Rabbi Shefa Gold says, Jacob, is inside each one of us. If we are his people, then he's in each one of us. In the earlier Parsha, when Jacob wrestled with the angel on the banks of the Jabbok, he received a new name, Yisrael, meaning one who wrestles with God and has prevailed. If we identify with his earlier persona, we might find some of his qualities in ourselves, such as the worrier, or someone who is impatient, argumentative, controlling, or manipulative. Nowadays, we could probably add in despairing about what humans have wrought on our planet and having done to our climate, and this peril that we feel humanity and all living things are in right now. And yet, if we identify with Yisrael, we too become the God wrestler, and that will prompt us to take on a spiritual practice and become less likely to become tricked or trapped by arguments of others. Lest we get tricked by outside forces such as the fossil fuel industry, it's important for each of us to have a spiritual practice where we stay true to our authenticity and replenish our spiritual juices and our creativity and our stamina and our resilience so we can keep doing the really hard work that we are here to do. So tonight we are focusing on the upcoming Farm Bill, which is renewed every 5 years. And in 2023, it will be renewed, hopefully with provisions that we will hear about shortly that we will be advocating for, that will help us humans reverse the climate crisis, improve food production in a sustainable way, and help avert potential devastation and mass starvations and other worries that we have as human beings. So I would like to introduce our first speaker. Before I do, I will ask everybody to stay muted during the time that she's speaking, and then Janna Siller is going to be our first speaker, and she's then going to introduce our next speaker. If you have questions, I invite you to put them in the chat, and I will monitor the chat and try to get to as many Q&As as we can after Ariana's presentation. Alert. And we'll get to that hopefully about 10 minutes before the hour. So let's get going here. I want to introduce Janna Siller. Janna, nice to see you. Janna serves as Hazon's farm director and advocacy coordinator, both very demanding roles, I am sure, especially after what I read about them. As the farm director for the Adamah farm, Janna guides apprentices, residential fellows, and volunteers in learning to grow organic vegetables on the farm. And the farm's produce supplies the Isabella Friedman Jewish Retreat Center in Connecticut, as well as local customers and food banks. Janna also maintains the fields. In addition to educating about growing food, Janna also teaches about climate change, food policy, food systems, and Jewish tradition. As the advocacy coordinator, Janna leads grassroots efforts to raise Jewish voices on behalf of a more just and regenerative food system. She's been farming since 2005 and has been working at the Adamah farm since 2011. Physical work with the community and in the soil informs and inspires Janna's approach as an advocate and educator. So Janna, take it away.
Thank you so much, Dee, and thank you so much for inviting this conversation. It's such an honor to be here with you all. I'm going to share my screen. Nice. So this is a little view of part of the Adamah farm. As Dee mentioned, my role at Hazon is twofold. I work with the Adamah Fellowship Program. So for anyone who is interested in joining us for 3 months next year, or knows someone who is in the 20s age range, and wants to work on the farm and learn and connect in Jewish community, that's us. We also have a program coming up in March, which is a 3-month Adamah at Home program. That's a Zoom 10-hour-a-week commitment where we'll talk more conversation we're going to have tonight, and also sort of brainstorm our gardening projects together and pray together and talk about Judaism and farming together. So that's a little bit about my Adamah role. I also, Adamah is a program of Hazon, which is a national organization, and we work in all kinds of different capacities, the intersections of Judaism and climate and the environment and earth stewardship in education, in action. And so that's a little bit of Hazon, and that's me there in my 2 roles. So let's see, I'll put some links in the chat later. I can't access it right now with my share screen. So you can learn more about Hazon, about Adamah. And one of the things that we have going on among the many at Hazon is a Farm Bill campaign. So you can check out more, www.hazon.org/Farm Bill. And we are gathering together Jewish support for a just and climate resilient 2023 Farm Bill. And this is a little image here of us with some of the produce we've harvested on the way to a food bank. So why personally, as a farmer, as a Jewish educator, why am I so invested in the Farm Bill specifically? Why is that such an ideal vehicle for some of the food system change that I'm working on from other angles? I think one of the most important things that I've observed in my time at Adamah is how hungry we all are for ways to make an impact, right? Abraham Joshua Heschel says that the opposite of good is not evil, it's indifference. In a free society where terrible wrongs exist, some are guilty and all are responsible. And so many of the people that I work with on the farm, we feel that, and we feel the transformation and the change that we can make by composting and by growing food. And also we know that there are these really, really big picture structures that impact the way that food is grown, the way that people access food, the way that people access land, the way that land is treated. And the Farm Bill is actually a really important piece of legislation. And in its importance, it's also an opportunity. So what is it? What's the Farm Bill? It's a collection of laws that govern most of US agriculture and food programs. It's authorized every 5 years or so. coming up in 2023. It'll be authorized. So again, reauthorized. So we have an opportunity for some tweaking, some edits, and that's what we'll talk about more tonight. And it really, one key thing to understand about this very, very big piece of legislation is that it brings together all kinds of different interests, and sometimes those interests are competing interests. So I'm going to take a few more minutes to tell you a little bit more about what the Farm Bill is, and then I'm really excited to pass the mic over to my colleague as a farmer, as an advocate, Ariana Taylor-Stanley, who will share a little more about our opportunities in this upcoming 2023 Farm Bill reauthorization process for making change. Okay, so let's dive into what the Farm Bill is, what's in there. So you'll notice in this pie chart that 3/4 of the spending in the Farm Bill is approximately nutrition spending. So that's mostly SNAP benefits, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And that's a really important program for addressing poverty in our country. Those benefits are an entitlement. Anyone who with a qualifying income is eligible to receive SNAP benefits in order to purchase food. And a lot of people wonder, why is that in the Farm Bill? Why does it matter that it's in the Farm Bill? Maybe it shouldn't be in the Farm Bill, and that's one of the things people are talking about for 2023. It's actually really important that it's in the Farm Bill to maintain compromise among different constituents and different interests. So the fact of it being in the Farm Bill actually helps drive compromise and helps to maintain those benefits. So we have a big chunk of Farm Bill spending being those nutrition programs. And then this yellow chunk is commodity programs. So those are programs that specifically support commodities, corn, soy, cotton, wheat, rice. And then the red slice is crop insurance. So kind of a safety net for farmers. The reality is that slice also really benefits. There's an outsized benefit to those commodity growers as well, because of the structure of those programs. So those two chunks really are particularly geared towards supporting those bigger farms. And then we have conservation programs, which when we look at the pie, maybe looks like a little bit of a small slice, but it's actually $59.7 billion. So it's a really big chunk of the Farm Bill, and we're gonna dive into what that is a little more with its relevance to Jewish Earth Alliance's climate focus and environmental focus. But first, we're gonna ask, how does the Farm Bill get authorized? Because this is important for us as advocates to understand the basics. So the first step is that a draft is written in the House Agriculture Committee and then in the Senate Agriculture Committee. So that work already has begun. Of course, we're going to have a new folks in the chairs come January, and that will affect how the drafts continue to be written. But that's sort of where we are this winter. Once each of those committees comes up with a draft version of the bill, it will go to the House version will go to the full House, and the Senate version will go to the full Senate. Once hopefully those are passed and amended and all those things, then the versions will go to a conference committee to be combined, and then back out to the full House and the full Senate. And then hopefully a combined final bill goes to the White House for the president's signature. So that's a little bit about the process. This chart feels interesting to me in particular in understanding, kind of referencing back to that pie graph, what some of the programs are. This is a list of programs by spending. So you can see in the far right column, the spending total. So corn subsidies gets number one. That's the most spending on a single program. This is from the Environmental Working Group, so you can look at some more of that information here at the link below, or if you just go on their website, you'll find quite a treasure trove of data. But you can also see that, you know, number one is corn, 2 is wheat, 3 is soybeans, and number 4 is the Conservation Reserve Program. So that's one of the programs in that conservation title that I mentioned. And it's a program that helps farmers receive incentives, receive payments for taking their land out of production and putting it into a conservation. So so what does that look like? You know, if prices for a commodity aren't higher, what a farmer thinks they can get based on the market value for a vulnerable piece of land, maybe it's vulnerable to erosion. In some way, it's not ideal for farming and would best be protected. It can be the farmer can receive an incentive to take that out of production. So I highlight that, and there's another on this top 12 list. There's another conservation program down here in number 12 to say that one of the interesting things about the Farm Bill is that there's a lot of really good stuff for climate in here, and it relates to a history of focus in different moments on soil conservation in the Farm Bill. And yet it's side by side with some of the incentives for growing in ways that are less sustainable. So the job of advocates with the Farm Bill is to really figure out how to make the programs that are most effective for addressing the climate crisis. How do we make those programs more robust, more efficient, bigger? The Inflation Reduction Act already gave us a big boost ahead of this Farm Bill cycle because funding limits were expanded for a lot of the climate focused programs in the Farm Bill. So I'm just going to quickly, of course, we could talk about this all day and then tomorrow again and the next day. But for the sake of time, I'm going to just give you a couple of quick highlights of things that are in the Farm Bill that are like seeds for a climate resilient food system. They're big deal programs that do a lot of work in terms of climate and can do even more. The better they're structured and the bigger they are and the more people use them. So the first area that I'll talk about is conservation. So the Farm Bill is the single, Ariana shared with me yesterday that the Farm Bill is the single biggest source of conservation funding for privately owned land in the US. So that's a really big deal. A lot of land in the US is privately owned. So it's a really big source of conservation funding. So some of the programs include the Conservation Reserve Program that I mentioned earlier that involves taking land out of production. There's also the Conservation Stewardship Program. That one is one, as well as the Environmental Quality Incentives Program that I mentioned here too. Those two are programs that Adamah is enrolled in. The Adamah, our farm here in Northwest Connecticut, receives incentives from. So this image here is one of our Adamanics, our Adamah fellows, really just petting the cover crop, I think. He's just enjoying it. And this is one of our fields. You can see that we have this kind of these stripes that are different colors, and that's because we have a living mulch path, a permanent clover path between each of the beds, and that's really protective against erosion. And then the bed itself for growing vegetables in this moment is cover cropped, so it has plants that are grown just to rejuvenate the soil and not necessarily to be harvested. And this is a practice, both of these practices, the perennial paths and the cover cropping, the annual cover cropping, these are practices that really enrich the soil, bring that carbon-rich environment to the soil, that reduce erosion, reduce soil loss. And these are the kind of practices that on a broad scale make a really meaningful impact on climate. So you can see that I have this map down at the bottom, and you probably can't see the numbers well at all, but here we are in the US, and it's telling us the percentage of CSP. Again, that's the Conservation Stewardship Program. That's where you get incentives for using climate friendly and other environmental practices on your farm. That's showing us that all of the states in red have 0% enrollment by socially disadvantaged farmers. That's a USDA category that includes farmers, BIPOC farmers, Black, Indigenous, people of color. And it's telling us that we have this incredible program for climate, and that it's underutilized by the farmers using it. BIPOC farmers are underrepresented among those populations. And that just really relates to a strong history in US ag policy of discrimination, right? We're standing on a food production that grew out of enslavement and land theft, and some of these things that we still see in things like this map of who's accessing these programs. So that's just another really big piece to tackle in the Farm Bill and in food and farm programs in general. Okay, another element of climate and the Farm Bill is renewable energy. This is my friend Amanda standing in front of her dairy barn, where the solar panels bought through this program that I'm mentioning, REAP, that provides all of the energy for her farm. So renewable energy is in there. We've also got research is a really, really big one. All kinds of things that I do on my farm, I do because I learned how to do them from research done through programs like the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program. We know that climate justice is racial justice, and racial justice is climate justice. It's really important to expand the pool of farmers to include everyone. Right now, 98% of land owned, farmed in the US is owned by white people. And so we know that the Farm Bill also needs to tackle that issue in order to include everyone in the work of coming up with climate smart food future. And a last example of climate and the Farm Bill is really about supporting local food systems. So there are all kinds of programs in there that support local food systems, including microloans to smaller scale farmers, farmers markets, and local food promotion program. So again, there's sort of these incentives for some of the types of farming that can be a big part of the climate solution in there that we want to expand and we want to grow. So I'll end it there and pass it on to Ariana to pick up where I left off and share more about herself and her farm in relation to the Farm Bill and her work, and also what are opportunities for action in the 2023 Farm Bill.
Thank you so much, Janna. That was an amazingly in-depth overview of such a complicated thing in a really short amount of time. I loved getting to watch you teach that. And it's nice to meet everyone else. My name is Ariana Taylor-Stanley. I use she, her pronouns. I'm coming to you today from my hometown of Seattle, Washington, Duwamish and Coast Salish territory, where I'm spending some time this year helping take care of family. But typically, I would be talking to you from my farm, which is on the other side of the country, on Gaiacono territory, near to Ithaca, New York, where I have a primarily vegetable farm growing veggies for community supported agriculture program and farmers markets. And I have a few sheep just kind of for milk and entertainment and manure. And yeah, that's my day job. But I also get to serve in advocacy work as Associate Director of Organizing for an organization called the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, of which Hazon is a member. And thank you, Janna, for being my slide clicker. So sorry, all that there's going to be a lot of like, next slide. Oh my gosh, I didn't even have to say it. Thank you. Yeah, so my organization, which goes by the acronym of NSAC, we have members all across the country, about 130 of them. They tend to be organizations that work directly with farmers and other, folks working to change the food systems, usually at the state, regional level, although we do have a few other national orgs like Hazon in the mix. And a lot of them do a lot of like direct service supporting farmers. It's like peer-to-peer education and all kinds of like really critical services. They have amazing conferences and newsletters and farm walks and all sorts of things. A lot of them do a lot of state policy, and they also want to affect federal policy on a shoestring. So that's why my colleagues and I exist. That's why we do our work. We help translate the priorities from this big movement organization, all these folks around the country who want to make federal policy, and especially the Farm Bill, work better for smaller scale, sustainable farmers, and want to encourage all farmers to move in that direction through better policy. They fund us, and we go to work in DC to do that work. And I'm remote, but most of our team is based in Washington, DC. Yeah, that's a little bit about our organization. Thank you for reading my mind, Janna. So let's talk a little bit about what we want to see change. So Janna gave you really good background on sort of what is the Farm Bill, how does it work, who is involved in passing it, all of those really critical basics. And I want to talk a little bit about what that means right now, because a Farm Bill, the way they tend to be written is that they have an expiration date. They expire about every 5 years, and then a new one needs to be passed. And the current Farm Bill expires at the end of September of 2023. So this is an incredible opportunity to create change, to rewrite this bill so that it can really address the climate crisis and help make agriculture more sustainable over the long haul. This is incredibly timely given where we're at in so many overlapping crises that affect our food system. So it's a huge opportunity, and there are many things that folks in our coalition want to see change so that this next Farm Bill can really be impactful and transformative. And they really echo some of the things that Janna already outlined in her really excellent talk about sort of like the fact that there are elements of the Farm Bill that already are kind of superheroes, like unsung heroes of the climate, of addressing the climate crisis. We have, like Jen is saying, like incredible programs investing in like, conservation on farms. That's something that my farm has taken advantage of as well. We've gotten to use a couple of different federal conservation programs to do like practices that really boil down to helping us sequester carbon in the soil, helping us like reduce our tillage and, create, because tilling soil releases not only carbon, but other greenhouse gases as well. And planting woody perennials, which capture carbon above and below the soil. So, these working lands conservation programs are pretty incredible, and they're already there. They already exist. and we can just invest more in them. This is an incredible opportunity to do that. And similarly, Janna talked about like research. She mentioned the incredible and sort of one of a kind sustainable agriculture research and education program, which like funds on-farm research driven by farmers. So things like that, things like investing in the pieces that make our local food systems work, like our farmers markets and other forms of infrastructure, like that is all essential for building climate resilient food systems. And it already exists. We don't have to start from scratch. Advocates have been working for decades to build all this into our federal policy. It's relatively small pieces of that overall pie that you saw, but it's critically important, and it's a huge opportunity to invest in those programs. And then there's the issue of access, which Janna also touched on, because we have all these really incredible programs, and a lot of them are built so that the more acres you have, the more money you get. And we know, and Janna mentioned this too, that because of histories of systemic racism and overt discrimination, and also just implicit, just the legacy of our whole food system being built on stolen land and stolen labor, that farmers of color disproportionately own very little land. And they're way underrepresented in terms of land ownership. And so when we have programs that pay you per acre, those disproportionately benefit white farmers because they disproportionately own more acreage. And not even that, that's true, but even beyond that, because of the legacy of discrimination, if you want to learn a little bit more about how that's looked over the decades, one easy place to start is to just do a Google search for Pigford versus Glickman. I can put it in the chat actually, which is a landmark lawsuit that the USDA settled, which demonstrates just a small bit, but it is still millions of dollars of the amount of resources that, in this particular case, Black farmers lost because of discrimination on that behalf of the USDA.
Ariana,
yes.
you're
Hello?
Ariana, can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, can other folks hear me? I sound like Dee's cutting out a little bit.
Yes, we hear you fine. We think it's her, not you. Go ahead.
Ariana, can you hear me? This is Dee.
Dee, yes. It sounds like other folks can hear okay, but maybe
is your
Wi-Fi
connection to Wi-Fi?
Maybe I can put that in the chat for Dee, or maybe if someone else is able to throw that in the chat for her. Okay, thank you so much, and I'll just keep on. But let me know if you lose me. So sorry. But yeah, so the Farm Bill, this next round represents a huge opportunity to look at why some of these programs are excluding farmers of color in particular, even where we have set aside, we've built into programs, okay, this funding is specifically reserved to benefit farmers of color who have been systematically disadvantaged when it comes to these programs. Even so, not all that money, as you saw in that graph of CSP program access, is being accessed. So what can we do? So improving that access, looking at better strategies, and especially when it comes to land and capital for beginning farmers and farmers who've been historically excluded. That's another major theme in what we're looking to see in the next Farm Bill. And then the third one, third sort of big theme is sort of big structural reforms around not just fixing what's working well and making it work better for more people, but there are also pieces of the way the Farm Bill is baked, the way that funds are allocated, that in some ways prop up means of production, ways of farming that wouldn't otherwise really make economic sense, that wouldn't necessarily be profitable and wouldn't necessarily and aren't necessarily sustainable. So what can we do? Where can we do reforms to make it so that we're not enforcing, we're not artificially incentivizing farmers to use unsustainable practices with our federal policy, because there are ways that, in addition to all these lovely things that the Farm Bill does because of the hard work of advocates like you all, there are also programs that, with the noble goal of keeping our food system running and keeping us from experiencing cycles of famine and for keeping lots of farmers from going out of business, have the side effect of upholding less sustainable practices. So there's ways that we can address that by addressing the safety net, crop insurance, and things around competition regulation. So that's kind of the big picture of what our coalition is hoping to see. And I want to talk a little bit about who are our targets. You all as advocates, I am sure know that, in order to, when we're thinking about how do we win? What are the levers of power? When we do our power map of how are we going to, who do we need to talk to? Who do we need to pressure to get the changes that we want to see? And so Janna mentioned in showing us sort of the process of how the Farm Bill gets written, that it is written by the agriculture committees in the House and Senate, which have many members. And so this is just a screenshot, but it's actually a little bit misleading. And I'll talk about that in a second because of the change of the balance of power in Congress that we're about to see. But I'm sure you all already know, but if not, obviously you can go to congress.gov and easily find your member of Congress. And then I'm actually going to throw a couple of links in the chat. And then I'm curious to know if folks are represented by anyone on the House or Senate Agriculture Committee. But Jen, if you'll go to my next slide, talk a little bit more about that transition. Oh, wait, was there another slide in there? No, interesting. Okay. There should have been, but I don't know what happened to it. That's okay. But you can keep the, I guess, pictures. There we go. So this is the Agriculture Committee as it stands today. And as you know, in January, we will have a new Congress as a result of the election last month. And because the party in power of each House of government determines the leadership of all of the committees on that side. The House Agriculture Committee, like all House committees, will be transitioning over to Republican leadership starting in January, and the Senate Agriculture Committee will continue to be under Democratic leadership. So that means the Senate Agriculture Committee will continue to be chaired by Senator Debbie Stabenow from Michigan. Didn't look like we had any Michiganders on, at least that put their names in earlier. And then on the House side, Congressman G.T. Thompson in Pennsylvania will be taking over as chair of the House Agriculture Committee. And I don't think I saw anyone in Pennsylvania either. So we don't have folks that are well positioned necessarily to influence the chairs. But I'm curious to know if you have others of you do have members who are on the Ag Committee. If you want, you can throw that in the chat if you do. That's always very interesting. That is a critical piece of having influence and being able to affect what goes into this bill. But it is not the only way. So I want to tell you a little bit about this one other powerful tool that we use for advocacy. And then I'll give you one other teaser and then pass it back to Dee, I hope, if her Wi-Fi is back on, to talk us through a way to take action.
Hey, everybody,
So,
I'm going to step in for Dee. I'm Amy Dick, and I help out on the steering committee of the Jewish Earth Alliance. So I'm going to, until Dee gets back, and I hope she will, I am going to take a look at some of the questions in the chat and ask them. Let's
hey,
see.
Amy,
Yeah.
could I
you're good.
do one more slide
Oh, sorry.
before
Okay.
we do that?
Okay, sorry.
I have just a couple more left. I'm sorry. I know we were running a little late when I started. But okay, I am seeing lots of great questions in the chat. Thank you so much, all, and I'm excited to get to those so soon. But I really want to tell you about this tool, which you may be familiar with from other work that you've done as advocates, especially, for example, if you were part of advocating on the big climate bill, the IRA that was just passed, because that was a technique that folks used to influence that bill as well. But we use, because the Farm Bill is so big, it's like can be like 1,000 pages long. It takes years to, the process for it is very long, but the actual like window between when Congress drafts that first bill and like when that moves out of committee is often like the time you have to work on that is very short. So we use a different technique to help so that advocates can influence what's in that bill earlier on in the process. And that's something called marker bills. And a marker bill is a real bill that actually is introduced by a member of Congress that includes real language that could end up, that is intended to end up in a big piece of like what we call omnibus legislation, like the Farm Bill. But the thing is, these bills are not intended to and don't usually come to a vote or pass on their own. Rather, I kind of think of them like a congressional petition. So any member of Congress can become a co-sponsor of a marker bill. And that's how they sort of show their support and show that like, I too am behind this change and want to see it in the bill. So the more co-sponsors that a marker bill has, the easier sell it is for someone on the Agriculture Committee to say, oh, we should copy and paste the language from this bill into the final bill. And the way they often work is they focus on individual like themes. So here's a list of a few that are either already introduced or sort of in development that we're excited to potentially support in the next Farm Bill. And each of these has sort of like a theme. Some of them aren't named yet, so the themes are very obvious because that's all we can call them. But the Agriculture Resilience Act focuses on climate. It's a big way that the Farm Bill can address climate change, and I have a whole separate slide on that. But we've got also one that addresses local meat production, which is really key to both like the possibility for like smaller scale livestock production, as well as local food systems being resilient. And then we're also working on a bill that would support that research program that we talked about, as well as one for local food systems that we expect to be introduced at the beginning of the year. And so these are great opportunities. I think it's useful to know what they are as an advocate, because you're not necessarily calling Congress and saying, hey, please pass the Agriculture Resilience Act, because it's actually not intended to pass. But you can say, please support it. Please co-sponsor it. Or I hope to see the priorities in this bill make it into the Farm Bill. So that's helpful to know. I've even had Hill staff, staff of members of Congress in DC kind of look at me funny and be like, but this is kind of like a whole other Farm Bill. What do you mean? Like, oh no, this is just the local food stuff we want in the Farm Bill. So I think it's useful to have just that little bit of wonky insider knowledge to be a really successful advocate. And yeah, here's a little bit more context on the Agriculture Resilience Act, which is our climate marker bill introduced by Congresswoman Shelley Pingree. And yeah, beyond that, I will share a couple of links to engage in this work going forward. One, if you are interested in hearing from NSAC, my organization, about when, for example, these marker bills are introduced and there's a need for folks to step up and support, that would be a great way to sign up to hear about them. I put that link in the chat. And then another exciting way to get engaged that I'll just mention briefly, because I want to be able to move into question and answer, is that we are planning something really exciting, a major farmer climate rally in March, which is just going to, I hope, be super impactful. We're going to bring thousands of farmers and allies. So this is an important issue for you. You are welcome to Capitol Hill to demand action on climate in this Farm Bill. And we're going to do all sorts of wild stuff from symbolic action, maybe grazing sheep on the National Mall, to the lobby
Ariana,
day, and
can
kind
I
of everything in
interrupt you for a
between.
sec? Ariana, can I interrupt you for a second?
Okay, welcome back.
Thank you. I had to get off and get back on again. We are running short of time and we wanted to give everybody a chance to have some Q&A, but then we also wanted everybody to do some action before we end the meeting in 11 minutes. So I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to the Q&A right now, but Janna, you were monitoring the Q&A, and I think if you can answer maybe one of them now, and then if we save the chat and follow up later, we can put stuff out through our newsletter and on the JEA website to try to answer some of those questions.
Thanks. Yeah, I can say a couple of very quick things. I'm just skimming the chat now because I couldn't see it when I was screen sharing. An interesting one just on Spamberger in Virginia. I know that she introduced a different climate-related bill for agriculture that actually NSAC, who's my own tutor on these things, has taught me is not an ideal way of addressing climate in ag, and so we can talk more about that. Deborah Lynn, if you want to chat about that, it involves carbon credits for farmers, which is really tricky. It's very hard to measure carbon in the soil. Another quick answer, does the crop insurance program incentivize producers to use conservation practices? Not so much, and it should. So that's one of the big the big tweaks that would make a huge difference if that was constructed in there. Farm Bill does include livestock, poultry, dairy. It includes all kinds of animal agriculture. And the impact of Republican takeover of the House on climate-friendly provisions in the Farm Bill, it's going to make it much, much, much more difficult than if that wasn't the case. And yeah, those are just some quick answers. Yeah, I'd love to, these are just such great, juicy questions. I know we want to get to the action. So I love that idea of saving the chat and maybe being able to follow up later.
Okay. So we're going to go to the action alert and ask you to do something right now, which we've done before in our network calls, which is to actually write a letter asking for support. And the agriculture action alert from our December 22 our action alert is specifically on the Farm Bill. You can access it if you go to the website, or actually I can screen share for a moment. I'm trying to have it not be so wonky on my screen, but let me see if I can get it. Okay. Let me pull it up here. Share screen. There we go. Share. Okay. Can you see this? So if you're using your computer or using a pencil and paper, pen and paper, you won't need to take a lot of time to read through the action alert. But if you can just say a few things from what your story is about why this is important and why now. We talked about the importance of supporting changes in the Farm Bill. And from the Jewish perspective, which is, we talk about eco-kosher raising of crops and taking care of animals and the kind of foods that we want to consume that are healthy for us. You can jot a few notes down from this. I'm not going to, God bless you. I'm not going to keep sharing now. We only have a few minutes left, and I have another couple of announcements to make. So I'm going to stop the share. Okay. And where are my notes? I got to get my cheat sheet here. Oh, sorry. Just hold on a second. Here we go. Alrighty. So there's another issue, and I don't want to muddy the waters here, but we have something that's very timely right now. And we do have a few months for the Farm Bill since it's coming up in the fall. But right now we're trying to get the Recovering America's Wildlife Act passed before this Senate disbands. Very important. If you haven't already written to your representatives about supporting the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, please do so. Contact your senator about bringing a vote to the floor. And the details about the act are in the November, May, and last January action alerts on our website. So go to jewishearthalliance.org. So that, in addition to the support for the Farm Bill changes, that's our work right now, folks. And I want to thank everybody for your participation tonight. It was really great to have so many of you on the call. We have about 4 more minutes. If there are any quick comments, you can raise your hand by using the reaction button. And if we can get to a couple of questions, we will. Okay. I just want to thank Janna and Ariana for excellent presentations. They were so informative. Thank you for your slides, your very information-filled slides. There's a lot of material, as you said, that we have to try to, quote, digest and act on. And I hope a bunch of us can, I mean, I live in the DC area and I try to get to those kinds of demonstrations down on the Hill or up on the Hill if you happen to be lower than the Hill. So I will try to be there on from March 6th to 8th and invite others to come to town. And if you want to come to town and need some housing support, let us know and we'll see if we can have some home hospitality for those of you who are coming. I also want to thank Amy for running the tech tonight. And you did a great job. Thank you for helping me get through the Wi-Fi wonkiness that I had. And I hope that you get the record, save the chat, because the chat from the beginning part of the meeting I missed because I had to go off and come back on again. So thanks again, everybody. Happy Hanukkah. May there be more light in all of our lives, and may all the people who are in the decision-making power places find that they are God wrestlers too, and they have to answer to a higher power than their own immediate needs. So may they hear the call that we're all hearing to do right by farmers, to do right by our work on energy production and sustainability. So take care, everybody.